Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience and welcome to our second customer information webinar held by Classic Lifts and hosted today by Andrew Harrison, our Technical Director. Just a bit of background on Andrew. He's been in our industry for many, many years and has a very wide experience across both lifts and also the technical elements associated with lifts. Today, our webinar is aimed at the UK's transition or transformation of its telephone systems to a digital network. And I'm very pleased to welcome as our guest speaker today, Stuart Garcia, who's the CEO for UK and Ireland for the Safeline Group. Safeline are a specialist in communication systems and a unique provider of systems to the lift industry across the globe. Again, Stuart has a long experience and wide knowledge of the lift industry in the UK and has a background both in lift and electronic engineering. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to the session today and to ask Stuart to kick off and to tell us a little more about this transformation that we're going through with the telecoms in the UK. Stuart?
Thank you, Lindsay. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good afternoon. So this afternoon, we're going to be speaking about the change of landlines to various different options that you may have. So if we can look at the first slide, please. So the UK digital switchover is happening in 2025. Well, that's the deadline that BT have set of all analog telephone lines. And we're going to look at the impact on lift auto dialers in particular. As you know, they're an emergency device. There's legislative rules for lift telephones. And there's some things that you really need to be careful of when we're switching over. So next slide, please. So what do we know? So we know that the PSTN, or copper phone lines as they're known, will be switched off in 2025. That's not completely true. They've actually started already. So if you look on BT's website, we'll give you some really good information on some postcodes that where they're going to be switching off next. Now, I think they started in around about 2020. They started some remote places in Wales, and they're gradually becoming towards the big cities now to switch off the analog telephone lines. One of the things you won't be able to do as from January next year is certainly not be able to order any new telephone lines at all. And they're going to be switching off the actual analog telephone line by the end of 2025. So what they're going to be replacing them with? So they're going to be replacing them with FTTP. That means fiber to the premises. For me and you, most people know this as VOIP. So that's voice over internet protocol. So most of your houses now have got fibre to them, especially in the big cities and in some remote areas now. It's gradually picking up. So that's what they're doing now. They're getting rid of the copper lines and they're going to replace them with the fibre. Now, the biggest difference with that is that the old telephone lines need 48 volts to be able to work. The new fibre cables don't come with any voltage. And that's the really big difference. And that's the reason why your existing lift telephones will no longer be able to work. What else are we looking at? So if you've changed your telephones to GSM over the last 5 or 10 years, we're also seeing a sunset mode for 2G and 3G. That means all the existing GSMs that we've had historically will now no longer work when maybe a mast breaks down. They're not really looking to fix it. There's no set date for the discontinuation of 2G and 3G. We just know it's on sunset mode because it's not really in the network's interest to keep these historical GSMs going. Most things now are going towards data, and 2G and 3G have data, but very, very slow. We can't stream on them, and that's where the networks are making their money. So they're looking at changing these over in the next 5 to 10 years also. So we're going to look at different aspects and what we can do to achieve the best possible with the least amount of risk. So next slide, please. So what is PSTN? So PSTN stands for Public Switched Telephone Network. Now, this has been around for more than 100 years. We all know Alexander Bell. invented the telephone over 100 years ago, we are still using the same technology as we did then. So it's quite unique. In the past 10, 15 years, we've had new GSMs, and now we're looking at VOIP. And VOIP is fiber to the premises, as we already discussed. So what is PSTN? These are supplied with copper lines direct to the emergency phone. So most of you have seen the hard wires in your house. That's exactly the same as go to existing telephones right now on your lift. So what's required? So immediate action will be required to avoid any disconnection. As I said, although it says 2025, we know already that it actually started the process in 2020. So it's just a matter of days, hours, months, or maybe a couple of years that you've got to actually switch over to your new network. Next slide, please. So when we talk about 2G and 3G, what does that actually mean? So GSM stands for Global System for Mobile Communication. We know 2G and 3G has been around for over 20 years. In fact, it's been around in a more basic form since the mid-80s. Remember the great big phones? And we've really used the same technology for making those calls all that time, really. It's only in the last maybe 5 to 10 years where we've been streaming via 4G and 5G now, as it's known. 2G is still used to make voice calls. 2G is still made to use voice calls, but at very low quality. So if you look at your mobile phone, although it may say 4G on your mobile phone, the chances are it's still making the calls over the 2G network. And that's the same with lift telephones. Most of the lift telephones out there are currently working on GSM, are still 2G. So what is 3G? 3G was the first data channel, and we pretty much use that for streaming. Streaming was extremely slow. We could send some picture messages, yes, and we could send some real slow data. But in general, 3G wasn't great, and it's still not great. And therefore, 3G will probably be the first network to disappear from the GSM communication networks. So what's the matter with 2G and 3G? Well, both networks are in sunset mode, as we discussed, and they are definitely disappearing. We're noticing that when a mast fails and we get calls, say, oh, look, my network's not working, the network providers are not repairing these masts as quick as they would on 4G and 5G. They're low priority for the network providers because they're not sending data, and there's not really a lot of traffic on them as much as there is on the 4G and 5G networks. On top of that, they're really low quality of calls. When you're making the calls over there, that's why they kept dropping in and out. The call quality wasn't great, and that's inherently you've been using 2G over your phone network. Next slide, please. So another form that we're looking at is an ATA. So what's an ATA? So if you do have fiber to the premises or VOIP in your building and you want to change your existing analog telephone line over to this new digital protocol, VOIP, this can be easily achieved by using an ATA, an analog telephone adapter. So there are possibilities. It's not like you have to rip out your auto dialer. You can actually keep your existing one and use an ATA. However, it's not as simple as that. So they can be used on emergency telephones and switch from PSTN straight to VOIP. That's great. They are inherently quite difficult to set up. So at the moment, your lift telephone is normally managed by your lift service provider. Lift service providers are not IT guys, and it will find it difficult to set up your new ATA. It's a bit like setting up a router at home, but having to put all of the actual digits in rather than it all done for you as it is these days. Now, one of the most important things about an ATA is that it needs its own power supply, because as we said at the beginning, the VOIP line doesn't have a power supply. So therefore, your new telephone, your existing telephone, sorry, still needs that supply voltage along its telephone network connection. So we need a power supply for the ATA, which is fantastic, nice and easy. You can plug that in the wall. But EN 8128, which is the standards for lift telephones, state that your lift telephone must have a battery backup. Now, what's the point in having a battery backup on your auto dialer device, but not on the telephone line that supplies it. Now, inherently, we've been using a PSTN line, which has been great because it comes with 48 volts. It's very, very reliable. Now, all of a sudden, we're putting another device in the line for your telephone network. So not having a power supply on your ATA now puts more risk on that network. Now, it's not saying it can't be done. Yes, you can put a UPS on it, no problem at all. So what else is there? Whose responsibility is this telephone line now? Yes, it's always the building owner's responsibility ultimately, but this device is usually installed in the lift motor room. So now you're looking at your lift engineer to say, well, is it working? Isn't it working? Who's monitoring it? And who's looking after this network? Reliability. That's another thing we look at. We look at risk factors when we look at emergency telephones. If we look at risk, we can say PSTN lines were very, very little risk. They were great network, worked for over 100 years. The proof is in the pudding, if you like. Now, all of a sudden, we have an internet connection providing a telephone line. And yes, generally, they're quite reliable. But how many times do you have to reset your router in your office? How many times does your computer crash? And they're the sort of things you need to look at if you want to go down the ATA route or the VOIP route. Next slide, please. So what is the alternative solution, or is there an alternative solution? Next slide. So you can upgrade to 4G Volta. This is one I would recommend. Next slide, please. So what is 4G Volta? So in 2018, 4G Volta, which is voice over LTE, was introduced, allowing for voice and data to operate over the same channel. Now, when we look back at 2G, that means we just had a voice channel and a very, very slow data channel within that. When 4G Volta was introduced, they was able to put the voice channel and the data channel down the same channel, which is really unique in the fact that if you can imagine having WhatsApp and you're able to receive a WhatsApp message in a really difficult area that you maybe can't make a voice call on. Now you can make that voice call over the same channel, which now gives you the opportunity to be in really poor areas that wherever you can receive data, you should also be able to make a call because of the frequencies that they're currently using. We found we've done a really good job with Classic last year and a really difficult building in central London, a landmark building. It had 4 basements. Now, there was no way you could make a call there with 2G. By using 4G Volta, it was still able to receive data. Therefore, we could still make a call over the same network. Next slide. So VoLTE is an additional internet service that carriers provide without charging any extra fee. Some carriers have described this service as HD voice. The reason it's called HD voice is because of the clarity of the call is 6 times faster and 6 times better than 2G or 3G would ever be. Next one. Historically, lift auto dialers have worked over the BT phone line or 2G GSM networks. Now, if you look at historical events and how we've done, and lots of questions we get is, okay, we've got 2G, we've got a GSM, or we've got a landline. If I change to 4G Volta, what's the risks involved? Of course, there's always risks. You're going to get risks if you have a PSTN line. You're going to get risks if you have 2G or 3G, and you will get risks if you have voice over IP. Mitigating those risks and what is the least amount of risk that we can have. Fortunately, 4G, and it will do up until the sunset mode runs out, will also work on 4G, 3G, and 2G. So if the 4G network was to go down, it can still work on 2G and 3G. Although the 4G network, 4G Volta network is extremely big now and it's increasing with power even more. Next slide, please. So prior to VoLTE, 4G networks relied on 2G to make voice calls, as we discussed. Data channel was only used to send picture messages and videos. So now voice calls and data calls can now be made over the same channel. This is, for me, why it's much less risk and much more of a future-proof solution than anything else that is out there. Because it can do data and voice, you can use these use this network as things evolve and your auto dialer may evolve. You'll be able to add different things on their data, lift monitoring if you need to, and other devices may be able to be connected, because these become a modem as well as a voice connection. Next slide. So the benefits of 4G Volta, as we said, it's a much faster transfer of voice, giving it a better quality of call, allowing clearer conversations. Reduced chance of losing signal due to the frequency. So you can have new builds with big concrete walls, and and most of the time it can still penetrate those walls to give you a good signal. It will future-proof. Even though 5G is now available in some areas, 4G Volta will still be used as the core part of the 5G network. Improved coverage and backward capability at the moment. We can still use 3G and 2G whilst they're still available. Next slide. So are you 2025 ready? That's the question. So we've made a little flow chart here that I know Andrew will share with you after the event to give you some brief descriptions on what do you have currently installed on your own sites and what you can possibly do to get to 2025 and make sure you're ready. One of the things I will ask is that if you are upgrading your auto dialer and just require a GSM gateway to get it working to the latest 4G Volta, that's great, but can you make sure that it's also of the latest standards? There's no point in spending money, in my opinion, on putting a nice fancy GSM on it if it still doesn't meet the latest standards of EN 8128. So I think that's me done. I think it was as basic as I could make it without going too technical in it. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, I want to hand you over to Andrew.
Good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed Stuart's presentation. I certainly did. I found it very informative. I've learned some things today. I'm sure all of us have. And I'm going to move on shortly on to what classic lifts can do for you. Make sure that you're safe with your communications and agree the pathway forward. Before they do that, I know most of you will know something about classic lifts. Some of you won't, and some of you may need a little bit of an update. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take 2 or 3 minutes just to give you a little update on where classic lifts sits today. Thanks. Next slide, please. So classic lifts was established in 1990, well over 30 years now. And it's a medium to large sized UK-based national lift company. We provide professional lift maintenance, repairs, modernisation and new lift installations from 7 regional offices. I'll get more onto the regional offices locations in a moment. Currently employ over 245 people. This seems to change daily in a growing company. Turnover over £30 million last year. We maintain over 8,500 lifts. These range from household retail brands, international hotel groups, schools, universities, and to small nursing home. They're all important. Residential developments is a growing area in our industry. We install and modernise over 250 lifts every year. Classic Lifts has grown considerably since its inception in 1990. The business was started by a guy called Dave Ball, one of the nicest men you'd ever meet in our industry, and he originally operated from his spare bedroom. Dave grew the business steadily, surviving 2 major recessions. Unfortunately, in 2010, Dave's failing health meant that he needed to sell the business, and it was acquired by the current senior management team. The growth since 2010 was accelerated. As I said, current position of 7 regional offices and a turnover in excess of £30 million. So the 7 regional offices, you can see from the map that they're strategically placed to offer true national coverage. Local people for local customers is our key to the position of those offices. England's well and truly covered. Currently have over 140 qualified lift engineers deployed throughout the country. They're there to offer high quality installation, maintenance and repairs to all types of lifts in all locations. The engineers are supported by a team of dedicated office staff we use state-of-the-art systems to manage our business and keep track of our engineers. This ensures that we know where they are to provide the fastest response. Next slide, please. So our business is built on some key aims and values. Exceeding your expectations is our aim. But we're not perfect. I don't know anybody who is. I don't know about you. What we do very well is we answer our phones and we try very hard. So give us a call. Our values of integrity, honesty and reliability are not just words. They help to drive everything we do. Accreditations are a major part of being compliant. We hold accreditations to all the major organisations covering all aspects of our business, from health and safety to quality and environment. We're also a long-term member of our trade association, LEA, the Lift and Escalator Association, and we have representatives sitting on LEA committees. As you can see, we have a very large and diverse customer base, working with some of the largest organisations in the UK. But equally, the single lift in the local nursing home, as I said earlier, is still very important, and they receive the same level of care and support. But back to Stuart's presentation. As you heard, 2025, the UK telephone system will have switched over to a digital system. Stuart explained incredibly clearly what will happen and what the options are. I make no apologies for repeating one of Stuart's slides. I'm sure he won't mind. Are you 2025 ready? Possibly not. Probably not with a lot of us. The flowchart provided by Stuart is extremely helpful in deciding on the path to take. Classic Lifts can help you in confirming this path, providing the equipment and expertise to make the change seamless. Repeat one of my earlier slides, we operate from 7 regional offices. This means that we're there with local people who can help ensure your vital communication systems stay operative within this changeover. The next slide will show the contact details for each of our offices. Please get in touch with your local office to discuss this very important subject. The sooner the better, the change is happening. If you're unsure of which office covers your particular location, email the bottom one national support or contact myself. My contact details will be appearing shortly. The sooner the better means there's going to be delays in getting equipment, there's going to be delays in getting this done. It's not just the lift industry that this is going to affect. So please get in touch. So I hope you enjoyed the webinar. I hope it's been informative and enjoyable. If you have any questions, then please feel free to ask via the chat function. It's available now. We'd be happy to take all your questions. If you have any questions in the future on this subject or any other lift related subject, then you can contact myself through our customer information page on our website, the link shown, or email me directly. I'm happy to receive the emails. We will email the full presentation to all the participants of this webinar, and you will get all the contact details. So again, thank you for attending, and please ask the questions. We're here to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Andrew. Just reiterating Andrew's point, we'll also be posting this on our website as well. But again, if you have any questions, please enter them through the chat. And just to sort of kick things off, we did get a couple of questions from people that couldn't make the session today. So if you don't mind, I think they're mainly aimed at Sean, but I'll start off and ask you, Sean, one of the questions that was asked is, are there any preferred network providers that you'd recommend?
No, there's no definite network provider that I would recommend. Obviously, you have the main 3, which are O2, EE, and Vodafone. They're the 3 that I would stick to. The likes of your Tesco's, your Sky Mobile, your Gift Gaffs, and all your smaller ones are actually all still supplied by the 3 majors, if you like. So I would try and stick to the 3 majors. Although the others are slightly cheaper, they do have less functionality. So they may not have VOLTA enabled on their SIM cards. So you may have to go through to the network provider to get the VOLTA enabled anyway. And you may not be able to do other small functionality like sending certain bits of data through them. So I would always stick to the 3 majors, and that way you know you're pretty much risk-free on those.
Thank you, Sean. That leads on really to the next question that I got, and that is, why 4G and not 5G? Why wouldn't we wait to get 5G on everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. As we see commercially on the TV and everywhere else, that 5G will be readily available over the next few years. I mean, it's very few and far between areas at the moment that can actually get it. But 5G is a streaming network that's built for gaming, videos, watching your Netflix, where the 4G VOLTA part will still be incorporated within that to make your voice calls. So the VOLTA bit is the most important part of that, which is voice over LTE. So they're going to incorporate that within the 5G system. So having your 4G VOLTA SIM card should still work for at least 10 years, at least 10 years.
Thank you. I've also seen on the chat that we've got another question. Do we need roaming SIMs to all networks then? I've been advised that we do.
Yeah, and another question, and look, these are new technologies. So 2G roaming works very well. Obviously, that goes between different networks all the time. And there's 2 types of roaming. There's steered and non-steered. So if you go to O2 steered, for instance, it will always steer you towards O2, regardless if you've only got 1 bar or maybe 15% signal and the others have got 80 or 90% signal, it will always steer you towards O2. So that's the first question I'd ask if you're getting a SIM card. Is it steered or unsteered? Unsteered means it will go between all 3 networks. Now, unfortunately, you can only roam on 2G for voice calls at the moment. I speak to the networks on a daily basis, and we're looking at the end of this year, 4G VOLTA should be able to roam between all networks. At the moment, you can only get 4G VOLTA on a single network. However, the signal is much stronger because of the frequency, and the reliability is much better on 4G VOLTA. And in my opinion, I would rather have a 4G VOLTA SIM card than have a roaming 2G SIM card.
Thank you. That again leads on to the next one that we've got, which is network signal strength is sometimes an issue. How do we overcome this?
Yeah, again, a question we get answered on a daily basis. I've been operating lift telephones now for over 12 years, so I've seen the transformation from PSTN, 2G, 3G, all the way to 4G VOLTA now. And we have seen a big decline in the 2G network signal strength due to masts not being serviced properly and so on and so forth. Look, you're always going to get poor signal areas in some cases. 4G VOLTA has been a game changer. The signal strength is much more improved. However, there are situations where you may not get a great signal. What you can do is extend the antenna. So we use a high gain antenna. That's one of the first questions you should ask. Do you use a high gain antenna? If it still doesn't work or you're getting a poor signal area, you can extend an antenna up to about 20 meters from one of our devices. So you can actually put it outside into another room, in another building, or you can relocate the GSM part of the auto dialer to a really good signal area within the building. You don't have to have the GSM necessarily in the lift motor room. It can be anywhere within the building, and it's normally just 2 wires supplied back to the auto dialer, if that makes sense. So there are options. As I said, I've been doing this 12 years. I've never not been able to get a good signal. Maybe not a really strong signal, but I've always been able to get a good signal.
Thank you. Andrew, did you want to comment on that as well, in terms of location of antenna?
Yeah, just through experience, it's exactly what Stuart said. We the location of the antenna and extending it sometimes away from the metalwork of the lift, it vastly improves the signal. So that the 20-meter extension cables are an item that's carried with all our commissioning engineers because sometimes it's needed. And I think with Stuart, we've never failed to get the signal. Sometimes you do have to work a little bit harder to do it, but the signal's there.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
I mean, sorry, I just on that point, Lindsay. I know Classics do it because we work really closely with them, but you can also have a signal test survey before you have the auto dialer installed, which means you can look at the different types of SIM cards. Maybe you have a stronger EE connection in the area, maybe you have a stronger O2 connection in the area. So you can actually look at that. And I know, as I said, Classic have got a signal analyzer that they can test like we do, and they can see the actual strength of different types of SIM cards as well.
Thanks, Stuart. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. I don't think there are at the moment. So I've got one which I think you've answered, but again, the question is, how urgent is this? You know, we have this 2025 deadline. I think you've answered it, but do you just want to mention anything more on that point?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is look on the BT website. It gives it clear indication of the postcodes that are currently being worked on and the ones that will be worked on in the near future, and it can give you a set date exactly when the PSTN lines will be no longer available for those areas. As I said, some of them have already begun. We're seeing big changes throughout the country, and we're having to change these pretty rapidly in some areas. Some areas may have another 6 months, may have a year, but it's really important that you have a look. The last thing you want to do is that on a Friday evening you find out your PSTN line is no longer.
Yeah, because the consequences are you can't use the lift, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. The legal standards state that you must have a form of two-way communication in every lift.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give the people on the line another opportunity just to ask any more questions. As I say, please do send anything through the meeting chat if you have anything.
One, I mean, I will just elaborate on something, Lindsay, if that's okay. There are some buildings, I mean, I've talked about the risks when you look at VOIP. What I don't want to say is that this, don't discontinue it completely. Don't think that it's not great to have. I mean, in certain buildings, VOIP is very beneficial, especially in the very large buildings where VOIP is available. They've got their own IT guys in there, and all the system and the networks backed up. I mean, it's a good system. What we look at is risk. If you've got a remote building that really struggles, there's no one really looking after the networks or the system or really keeping an eye on it. Therefore, that's when I would say, look, GSM's probably the safer option.
Okay. We have another question, and it's the question is, what standard state that two-way comms is needed? Andrew or Stuart,
Yeah.
do you want to comment on this? Yeah.
I'll start with that. I'm sure Stuart will. The lift regulations, which came into force in 1997, or published in 1997, state all new lifts must have a form of two-way communication. The standard Stuart mentioned earlier, EN 81 Part 28, gives details on that communication and the functionality and how it should operate. But all new lifts since the late 90s have been a requirement, a legal requirement to the lift regulations to have two-way communication.
And in the last few years, some of those standards have changed slightly. So it's now a two-way form of communication where there's a possibility of passengers inside the lift. You've got to think of the lift engineers that are also working on top of the lift and underneath the lift on their service. They also need a form of two-way communication in an emergency.
I think one of the things that perhaps, Andrew, we could reference the standards when we put this out as well, just to answer that point. So, again, any questions from the participants, please? I'll give you another sort of minute, and if not, we'll close the call.
Am I right in saying, Andrew, that you also supply SIM cards as well for your customers?
Yes, yeah, we will supply SIM cards, yeah, on a contract SIM cards on a set contract, on a 2 or 3 year contract, which then can be taken over by the customer after that.
Okay, I think that's our last question for the day. I'd like to thank all participants for joining us today on our, as I say, our second webinar for this year. I'd also like to again thank Stuart and Andrew for setting the tone of the conversation here, and again for your questions and for your interest in this subject. So once again, we'll keep you informed of our next webinar, which will probably be after the summer break. And again, if you've got any questions, as Andrew said, please be in touch with either our local offices or with us direct, and we will get back to you. So again, thank you for that, and thank you for joining our call.